When I first checked the numbers, I thought it was a mistake. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the ticket. I checked again and again, matching every number. It was real. I had just won $200 million. My whole body went numb. I sat there in silence for minutes, staring at the screen, trying to breathe normally. I didn't scream or dance. I didn't even smile. The first thought that crossed my mind was don't tell anyone. I knew how people changed when money got involved. I'd seen families break apart over a few $1,000s. I could only imagine what 200 million would do. So, I decided to stay quiet. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. My fiancé Ryan kissed me goodbye, complaining about the bills again. My best friend Chloe texted me about going out for drinks after work. Everything felt the same, but I wasn't. Inside, I was hiding the biggest secret of my life. I wanted to test something. If I stripped away the comfort, the stability, would they still stand by me? Before claiming the prize, I contacted a lawyer I found through a private referral. He was calm, discreet, and professional. He helped me set up a trust so my name would never appear publicly. I didn't want fame. I didn't want strangers knowing who I was. I just wanted safety and a plan. When the funds were secured, I looked at the number in my new account and felt nothing but confusion. It was supposed to be happiness, right? But all I felt was fear. At night, I lay next to Ryan, listening to him talk about wanting a bigger house, a new car, and a vacation. Every sentence was about more. Chloe, too, always complained about how life was unfair, how she deserved luxury. They both wanted wealth so badly, and I suddenly wondered, did they love people, or did they love what people could give them? That question stuck in my mind for days. I started paying closer attention. Ryan never asked how I was feeling, only how much overtime I could pick up. Chloe started asking for small loans, saying she'd pay me back next week, but never did. It was like I was surrounded by people who only saw me as useful when I had something to offer. That's when the idea came to me, to find out the truth. I wouldn't tell anyone about my win. In fact, I'd do the opposite. I'd pretend I lost everything. No savings, no job security, nothing. It would be painful, but at least I'd finally know who cared for me, not for my wallet. As I stared at my reflection that night, I whispered to myself, let's see who really stays. My life was about to change again, but this time, not because of money, because of truth. The day I told Ryan that I had lost my job, he didn't look shocked, just annoyed. I explained that the hospital had gone through budget cuts, and that I was one of the unlucky ones. He asked a few questions, then sighed and said, we'll figure something out. I wanted to believe him. For a moment, I thought maybe he meant it. But as the days went by, I could see the change start. He became quieter, colder. The small things disappeared. The morning coffee he used to make for me, the way he'd ask about my day, the soft touch before bed. It was like love had an expiration date tied to my paycheck. I sold my car to make my story look real. I said I needed the money to cover rent and groceries. Ryan didn't offer to help. Instead, he started making comments like, maybe if you had saved better, or I can't carry us both. Those words cut deeper than he realized. I wanted to scream that I had enough money to buy 10 houses, 10 cars, and never work again. But I bit my tongue. This was the test. I needed to see it through. Chloe, my best friend since college, reacted even worse. When I called her to talk about losing my job, she said she was too busy to meet up. Before, she'd always been the first one to show up with wine and gossip whenever something went wrong. Now, my messages were left on read. When I did manage to see her, she complained the whole time about her new boyfriend and money problem, not once asking how I was holding up. One night, Ryan came home late from work. He didn't notice I was sitting in the dark, crying. He just walked past me, grabbed a beer, and turned on the TV. I realized then how fast people can turn into strangers when the comfort of money disappears. The man who once promised to stand by me through anything couldn't even stand to look at me when I was broke. I started dressing simpler, cooking cheap meals, and taking the bus. The people who used to greet me with smiles now acted like I didn't exist. Even neighbors who once waved when I drove my nice car barely nodded. It was like my worth had been tied to what I owned, not who I was. Each day, the distance grew. Ryan stopped saying, we'll figure it out. Chloe stopped answering altogether. I ate dinner alone, the sound of silence heavier than any words. Still, I kept my secret. I told myself that it was better to lose fake love than to live surrounded by it. Every night before sleeping, I reminded myself of my plan. I was still the same woman, but the world around me was revealing what it truly was. It hurt, but it also cleared my vision. Money didn't change me. Losing it, pretending to lose it, changed how I saw everyone else. That night, Ryan yelled at me again. He said he was tired of paying for everything and that I needed to get my act together. I didn't argue. I just stood there, numb, as he slammed the door and left. The apartment felt cold and small, like the walls were closing in. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the night without a plan, just needing to breathe. The streets were quiet, and the November air carried that kind of chill that makes you think too much. I walked for blocks until I saw a little diner still open. The neon sign flickered, and the smell of coffee and fried food drifted through the air. I slipped inside, sat at the counter, and ordered a cup of coffee. My wallet had only a few crumpled bills left, but I didn't care. I just wanted to sit somewhere that wasn't filled with anger. As I stirred the sugar into my coffee, a man sat 2 stools away. He looked tired, like someone who worked hard every day without much rest. His hands were stained with grease, and his jacket looked worn but clean. After a few minutes, he glanced over and said softly, "Rough day?" I didn't know why, but I answered honestly. "Rough month," I said with a weak laugh. We talked a little. His name was Miles Turner. He worked nights at a mechanic shop nearby, fixing trucks and old cars. He told me he'd stopped in for a quick bite before heading home. I didn't tell him much about myself, just that I'd been having a hard time. He nodded, not judging, just listening. When I went to pay for my coffee, I realized my wallet was emptier than I thought. I felt my cheeks burn in embarrassment. Before I could say anything, Miles handed the waitress a few dollars and said, "I got it." I shook my head, telling him he didn't have to, but he smiled. "It's okay," he said. "You look like you need a break more than I need the cash." His voice was calm, sincere. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't asking for anything. He just wanted to help. It was such a small thing, just a few dollars, but it hit me harder than anything had in weeks. Ryan hadn't offered to help. Chloe hadn't even checked in. But this stranger, who owed me nothing, showed more kindness than the people who claimed to love me. We talked a bit longer before I left. He walked me out, hands in his pockets, and said, "Take care of yourself, okay?" It sounded simple, but those words stuck with me. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. As I walked home through the quiet streets, I thought about what had just happened. Miles didn't know it, but he reminded me that not everyone's heart is for sale. Real kindness still existed. It just didn't come from where I expected. That night, I realized that the richest people in the world aren't the ones with money. They're the ones who still have humanity left in them. Ryan's attitude got worse with every passing week. He barely spoke to me anymore unless it was to complain. He stopped eating dinner with me, stopped asking how my day was, and started finding excuses to leave the house. When I asked where he was going, he'd say he was working late or hanging out with friends. But I could feel something was off. His tone had changed, his eyes didn't meet mine, and his phone never left his hand. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. I wanted to believe he was just stressed, maybe frustrated about money. But the distance between us grew until it felt like I was living with a stranger. He'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, and when I asked about it, he snapped that I was being paranoid. I didn't push it. I just watched quietly, pretending to be the same broke, helpless woman he thought I was. Around that same time, Chloe started calling again. She said she wanted to check on me, but every time we talked, she somehow ended up asking for money. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones. I told her I didn't have anything left, that I was struggling too. She would sigh and say, "You always had it together, Eve. I guess it's my turn to help myself." I didn't realize then how much truth hid behind her sarcasm. One evening, Ryan told me he was going out with a coworker. I didn't ask questions. I just nodded and said goodnight. But an hour later, I remembered that he'd left his jacket behind. His phone was still inside the pocket, buzzing with notifications. I tried not to look, but the name that flashed across the screen stopped my heart. It was Chloe. The preview showed a message that said, "Can't wait to see you. Same place?" My stomach turned. I felt dizzy, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I didn't open the phone. I didn't need to. My instincts already knew the truth. Still, I had to be sure. I put on my coat and went out, walking toward the restaurant where Chloe worked part-time. I stayed across the street, hiding behind a parked car. And then I saw them, Ryan and Chloe, sitting close, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. His hand brushed her arm, and she leaned in to kiss him. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My body went cold, my mind blank. I wanted to scream, to run across the street, to throw the truth in their faces. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching the two people I trusted most share secrets and smiles that used to be mine. They didn't see me. They didn't care who might. They looked happy, carefree. And then I heard Chloe laugh and say, "She's too broke to even notice." Those words echoed in my head the whole walk home. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat in silence, realizing the cruelest part of betrayal isn't losing people. It's learning they were never yours to begin with. The next few days after finding out about Ryan and Chloe felt like walking through fog. I went through the motions, waking up, making coffee, pretending to exist. But inside, I was empty. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask for explanations. There was nothing left to save. Every time Ryan smiled at me, pretending nothing had changed, it made me sick. Every time Chloe texted, acting like a friend, it reminded me how cruel people could be when they thought they'd won. I waited quietly. I packed my things a little at a time, just enough so he wouldn't notice. A few clothes, my personal documents, small keepsakes that actually meant something. I didn't want anything bought with his money or touched by their lies. I wanted a clean start. One night, Ryan told me he was going out for a drink with a buddy. I knew exactly where he was going. The moment the door closed behind him, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. I looked around the apartment one last time. This place, once filled with laughter and plans for a future, now felt poisoned. I left the key on the counter with a short note that read, "Thank you for showing me what love never was." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. He'd know. I took a small bag and walked out into the night, not looking back. The air was cold, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I checked into a small motel on the other side of town under a different name. It wasn't much, just a single bed, peeling wallpaper, and silence, but it was mine. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe. The next morning, I called my lawyer. When he heard my voice, he sounded surprised. I hadn't spoken to him since I claimed the winnings. I told him I needed to meet and start making changes. Legal, financial, strategic. I wasn't acting out of anger. I was planning. I didn't want to destroy them out of spite. I wanted to move on with peace, and maybe a little justice. Over the next few days, I finalized the paperwork to transfer a portion of my assets to a new identity. I didn't want my name connected to anything that could trace back to my old life. I bought a small apartment downtown in cash, no loans, no noise. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about taking control. At night, I thought about Ryan and Chloe, imagining their faces when they found the note. Maybe they'd laugh. Maybe they'd panic. It didn't matter. Their chapter in my life was closed. As I sat in my quiet room, I realized something strange. I wasn't broken anymore. I was awake. All that pain had turned into something powerful, clarity. I wasn't the woman who waited for love to be proven. I was the woman who learned to prove herself. And this time, my next move wouldn't come from hurt. It would come from strength. The days after I left were quiet but heavy. I kept to myself, spending most of my time inside the small apartment I had rented. It was peaceful, but the silence often reminded me of everything I had lost. Or rather, everything I had discovered wasn't real. I tried to stay busy, but loneliness has a way of finding you, even in the calmest places. One afternoon, I ran into Miles again. I was walking back from the grocery store, and one of my bags tore open, sending everything rolling down the sidewalk. Before I could bend to pick it up, he appeared out of nowhere, kneeling down to help me. "Evelyn," he said, surprised but smiling. I hadn't seen him since that night at the diner. I smiled back, a little embarrassed but honestly happy to see a familiar face. We started talking, just small things at first. I told him I had moved to a new place and was figuring things out. He didn't ask too many questions. He never pushed. That was one of the things I liked about him. He gave space, not pity. A few days later, he showed up at my building with a small box of groceries. "Just thought you could use a few things," he said simply. It wasn't charity. It was kindness. When I mentioned that my old car wasn't running well, he offered to take a look. The next morning, he spent hours outside in the cold fixing it. When I tried to pay him, he shook his head. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You just needed someone to show up." That line stuck with me more than he probably realized. Over the next few weeks, Miles became my one steady connection to the world. We'd sit on the steps outside my building, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his late father, how he'd taught him to work with his hands, how life hadn't always been easy. But there was something peaceful about the way he carried himself. Quiet strength, no bitterness, no show. One evening, after a long talk, I decided to tell him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I told him about Ryan, about Chloe, about leaving everything behind. I didn't mention the money, just the betrayal. He listened without interrupting, his eyes steady and kind. When I finished, I expected advice, maybe sympathy, but instead he said softly, "You don't owe them anger. You owe yourself peace." Those words hit me harder than any apology I'd ever wanted. For weeks, I'd been thinking about revenge, about making them regret what they'd done. But hearing that, I realized what I really needed wasn't revenge. It was peace of mind. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Miles. The man who had nothing gave more than anyone with everything. His kindness reminded me of what real humanity looked like. And for the first time since all of it happened, I didn't feel broken. I felt grateful to still have the chance to meet someone like him.